Welcome to the Bonfire Chat. I'm Jace, and this is a place for real stories, honest conversations, and the advice we wish someone had given us sooner. So pull up a chair and let's talk. Good morning. We're in August. We've been in August for a week or so now. And that means somewhere right now, a teacher is sitting in an empty classroom wondering where their summer went. And I understand that feeling all too well. Folks, it is that time of the year where teachers are getting ready. And I guarantee you, they have so much anxiety right now. They are racing through their minds, preparing for the first day of school. I mean, even right now, you might have your teachers prepare for Meet the Teacher Night. They're making sure that everything is ready to go, making sure that they put on their best impressions for you, letting you know that your student is going to be just fine with them, that they're going to have a good time in their class, but also reinforcing their expectations, letting the students, being realistic with the parent, and trying to get them involved as much as possible. It's that time. It's been that time for maybe 2 to 3 weeks now. As a parent, you've been preparing since the beginning of July with all of the back to school sales going on, making sure that your child has school supplies, or reaching out to community event organizers, seeing if there's a way that you can get school supplies for a discounted price or even for free. Donated school supplies. I know that happens a lot too. Especially in the area that I taught, there were events where they gave out school supplies for free for low-income families. And it's a very sweet, sweet thing to do for them. And it made me happy to see that the kids had the school supplies that they needed. But it also made me question some other choices that they may have. And I'll talk about them here in just a bit. But, yep, it's that time of the year. Kids are going back to school, and parents rejoice, teachers are dreading. And it's true. Parents rejoice that they no longer have to, quote unquote, babysit their child, parent their child. No, that is a generalized statement. It is. It's a generalized statement. But I've met, during my time as a teacher, I've met many parents that definitely treat their child like that. They treated their child as if they were babysitting, and now it was our turn to babysit and teach and raise their child. Some parents, I will say, forget that as teachers, we help raise your child in an educational sense. It's not our sole responsibility to raise your child as a human. That is the parent's job. It is the parent's job to help educate their child about their emotions, about how to treat others, about manners and respect and all of that. Teachers, their job is just to teach the subject matter. That is the goal. That's their job. And parents forget that a lot. They just expect us to raise their kids. And that's not what we do. That's not what I did, But, I mean, I'm just thinking back now, because I'm not going back to teaching. I actually left teaching back in June. And it was a scary decision to make because I had a plan for what I was going to do next. And that plan kind of fell through, unfortunately. So now I have to kind of figure some stuff out, get some certifications and all that. But right now, as I'm speaking into this microphone, as I'm making this episode of the podcast, if I was still in teaching, I would be at the school right now, dreading the rest of the day. You ever get burnout in the first month of your job? That's what happened to me. This past year when I was in my technically it's sixth year of teaching. My first year I was a substitute, but I'm still going to count it because I was still, quote unquote, teaching. But this past year, I remember finishing the month of September, and I was already burnt out and tired and exhausted and all that. I remember going back and thinking about my first year of teaching, like officially first year of teaching. And I was teaching at a small school district in Texas. I had just received an offer to be a band director for middle school in a small district of Texas. And the school district was so small that I was going to act as the head director at the middle school and act as an assistant director at the high school. So I was basically doing two different jobs, with my primary focus being at the junior high. Now, the place that I got hired was a 40-minute commute from where I was currently living at the time. So I was kind of used to driving a commute like that because when I was doing my student teaching, my commute was very similar. It was 10 minutes less, but I had a very similar commute. So I wasn't really dreading or stressed out about that. But it was really hard when we had to do early morning rehearsal at the high school for marching band. And I had to get up at like 5 a.m., get dressed in 15 minutes, and then make my way to the junior high, put all my stuff away, and then walk across the street. The campus was literally across the street to the high school. And then get ready for morning rehearsal for marching band. Now, I'm thinking about it right now, and it's kind of triggering because it wasn't a good experience, and I'll tell you why in a bit. So I remember going a lot of the times to this middle school, and kind of, yeah, I was never a morning person. I'm never a morning person, and so getting up super early and trying to like eat breakfast and all that and trying to get to the school. Like I remember there were many days where I would be driving and I would start drifting slightly off the road because I was falling asleep. And it was terrible. And this was before I even started drinking energy drinks or drinking coffee, like doing my caffeine intake to just kind of wake me up. And so I would get to the school and I would be like the first one there. Not even the principals would be at the junior high. I was usually the first ones there besides the janitorial staff, the custodians. And I remember I would have this like breakfast shake to kind of, have it in the morning so that I wasn't going hungry. Because as soon as that rehearsal was over, I had to go straight back to the junior high and start teaching. So there wasn't really much of an opportune time to eat anything. So I remember getting to the school early, and as I get to the school, I was having my breakfast shake, and the first thing I would do, this was like at the early September. It started about early September, early to mid-September. Okay. And as soon as I would get to the school, I would go straight to the teacher's lounge, into the bathroom, and vomit all of that up. I remember, and I thought it was just like I was just getting sick. I thought I was getting really sick. I was like, oh man, this is not good. The first time it happened. And so then I was like, okay, well, there goes my breakfast. Let me just deal with it, and we can move on. I'll have my lunch a little early. So I would do that. I'd have my lunch early, and then I would start to get hungry towards the end of the day. But luckily, once school was over, I was in my car driving home, and there was an HB on the way. So if I was really, really starving, I would just stop at the HEB and grab myself something quick before I head home. And that happened very consistently for about a few weeks now. So as this was going on, I started to feel more and more anxious as I got to the school. And it's not because the kids were terrible. They weren't perfect, but the kids weren't bad either. What made the whole experience absolutely horrible for me was the high school director at the time. So when I got hired on at the middle school, there was no high school director for weeks. And I got hired back in, at that year, I was hired in May, I believe. Because I remember school was still going on and it was getting close to ending. It was either April or May, one of those. And at that time, the high school director was not hired. And they weren't hired until early July, and I was not a part of the hiring process, so I had no idea who I was working with. And then when I met the band director, I got a sense that this might be an interesting experience, and so I went along with it. You know, I could not get a good vibe from him, but I was viewing this work relationship as a professional one rather than, oh, like, okay, let's get to know each other, you know. And so as time went on, I got to learn more and more about this person's character, and although I was questioning a lot of the judgment choices that they would make, I didn't want to say anything further because this was a person that had more years of experience than I did. So I kind of tried to see them as a mentor figure. Well, it got to a point where it started to turn a little toxic. And I would, I'm in the process of like trying to get to work. I'm anxious, I'm throwing up and all this stuff. And I'm getting to the rehearsal as quickly as I can, but trying to remain composed, not trying to show my anxiety. And I forget a document that we needed for a rehearsal. It wasn't like it was a big deal. It was a resource that we would use that would be super helpful, but I forgot it. And I remember this man called me out and kind of humiliated me in front of all of the students. And that was kind of my breaking point at the time. I remember walking away trying not to cry in front of the kids because I was already going through a lot mentally, with the anxiety and, the toxicity was growing and growing and growing every single day. And I had to walk away because it was not going to be pretty for either of us. It wasn't going to be good for me professionally. It wasn't going to be good for him professionally. Like, it just got really bad. And then I remember it got to a point where it was at the end, it was at the football game, Friday night football game. And we instructed the students to be responsible for certain things. And when it was our time for the halftime, they forgot the podium that the drum majors were supposed to stand on. And I'm trying to like manage our students to make sure they're in the right spot. And then the head director himself is like, where's the podium? Where is it? And he's looking at me like it was my responsibility. I was like, we instructed the students to do it. So we looked at the students and they were as confused as us. And so I remember having to run to get the podium, pick it up myself. And this was a pretty big podium too. And I try to run across the football field to put the podium where it's supposed to be at. By the time I get there, he had just started the halftime, and there was no point. And I was embarrassed. I felt so embarrassed about it because I'm running across the podium. I'm running across this field with this podium in front of everybody, and they're all just kind of like confused and looking at me. And I, as an introverted autistic man, when that happens, I kind of like just crash out And I didn't crash out in front of people, but I definitely had to go take a walk for sure to calm down. I was just so frustrated. And I remember by the time the game ended, I got to my car and I threw my stuff in the passenger seat like very hard. And I sat in the car and I screamed so loud. And I cried and screamed and thrashed out. I just needed a release of negative emotions at that point. And so I I made a decision that evening. Was it worth years of experience? Was it worth the experience to get um in this line of work, or should I cut my chances here, cut my losses here, and move on somewhere else? And so I went home and I slept it off and I thought about it for a bit over that weekend and I decided maybe I should seek the advice of my administration. And so on that Monday, I went back to work. I put my stuff down and I called the principal and I said, I want to request a meeting with you if possible. I need to I need to seek your advice. Being a first year teacher. And so they were like, yeah, let's set up a meeting at towards the end of the day around 3 o'clock. And I said, okay, that's fine. I can get through my day. I'm at the middle school the entire day, so I'm gonna get through it and then I'll be done. And so I get through the rest of the school day, and then at the end of the day, and it's time for the meeting. So I go and have my meeting with the principal, and I sat down, and I'm already exhausted emotionally and physically at that point. And I sit down in the office, and he goes, "Okay, um, I know you're requesting a meeting, so what is it that you want to talk about?" You know. And I looked at him, and I'm just like trying to hold back tears, and I'm being emotional because it was a lot at the time, especially as a first year teacher. It's like very overwhelming. You know, it would have been easy. It would have been a much better experience for me if I had a head director that wasn't so aggressive in their approach, and less toxic would be nice too. But I told the principal, I looked him in the eye, and I said, "Look, this is what's happening with me and the head director at this high school. I am kind of at my wit's end trying to make things work, and I've been throwing up every single day from anxiety. I've been trying my best to kind of be a really good coworker and a good employee and a good teacher for the students, but this has really been affecting me emotionally and mentally to the point like I don't feel like I'm at my best for you. And I would like your advice, being a first year teacher, and you have your principal having years of experience in education. What is some advice you can give me to kind of push through this kind of wall that I find myself in? Because I've been thinking about resigning, and I don't want to do that to the kids, but I have to think about my health first. And I just need help. I don't know what to do. And I remember I was in tears, and the principal looked at me, and all he said to me was, "So what would you like for me to do?" And in that moment, I couldn't believe what I heard. He basically said, "What do you want me to do? I can't really do much for you." And in that moment, because then afterwards he said, "Because all I took away from what you're saying is that you want to resign." And I couldn't believe it. I said, "I've had thoughts of resigning, but I don't really want to do that to the students. I want to be the best teacher I can be for them, for this school, for this community. But I can't really be that teacher if I'm constantly being attacked and in it always being an aggressive confrontation, in an aggressive situation with the high school director. Like at this point, like The only way that I could see if we can make this work is that I just stick with the junior high and he sticks with the high school, and that's it. And I just remember he goes, well, there's not really much that I can do to help you. All I took away is that if you want to resign, and if that is what you want to do, then please send me your resignation letter and then we can get the process going. And I felt so alone in that situation. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I remember and I didn't even breathe. I stood up and I walked out the room and I wrote my resignation letter. I typed it out on my computer that very moment. And I saved it to send the next day. And I remember I said that I would put in my 2 weeks in that resignation letter. I'm giving you 2 week notice that I'll be resigning from my position. And I remember sending that in. And then the very next day, I get an email saying, we have received and accepted your resignation letter. Please stop by the principal's office and leave your ID and badge and keys. And I remember going back to work the next day and I carried out the last day as the director for this junior high. And I couldn't tell the kids. I couldn't look them in the face and tell them that I was leaving. Because the kids had started to like me as their teacher, and it would just hurt them and it would pain me. And I remember the day had ended, and I walked to the principal's office. I put down my keys. I gave him my badge and, key to the building and all that. And all he said was thank you. And I walked out. I walked into the parking lot. I walked to my car. I got in and I drove away. And that was 7 years ago. As this moment that I was speaking right now, that was 7 years ago. I had started the job in August, and the job had ended in October. And it's hard. It was hard to leave that position because I had to think of myself. I had to think for my personal health and mental, emotional, physical health. But I didn't want those kids to feel abandoned. And for a long time, I had regret and sadness about it. And I remember getting emails, my personal email from the students who found it and sent me emails saying that they missed me and that they were sad that I left. And that hurt even more. But at some point, I had to consider my own, I had to be selfish. And when teachers leave, folks, most of the time, they're not leaving for the students unless they were like having a miserable experience. Most of the time, they're leaving because of an outside source. Most of the time, they're leaving because of administration antagonism. Most of the time, they're leaving for personal health matters. Most of the time, they're leaving for job changes and, they have to move and stuff like that. Just because a teacher leaves at the end of the year doesn't mean that they hate your kid. That may not be true for everyone. Just because a teacher leaves at the end of the year doesn't mean that they're going to your rival school or that they're leaving because they no longer like the students and stuff like that. Most of the time, the teachers are leaving because they're drained, burnt out, and feel alone and not supported. Whether it's from parents, whether it's from admin, well, a lot of the time they feel it from admin. But just understand that is the reason why most teachers leave. Now, ever since then, the funniest thing that happened from that experience is that so I left in October, then November came, so there was like a couple weeks of school still. Then they would have Thanksgiving break, and then they had a couple more weeks of school still, and then it was Christmas break. This next semester starts, and the funniest thing, not really funny. It's funny in a morbid way. The craziest thing happened. Y'all remember the COVID-19 pandemic? Yeah. So I left the job right before the COVID-19 pandemic happened. And I remember seeing all over the news about schools being shut down, going to virtual learning, COVID cases are rising. I remember seeing all of that. And I remember thinking like, man, I wonder if that was a sign from the universe telling me like to protect yourself, you have to leave right now. Otherwise, if you don't leave right now, you're going to be finding yourself in some kind of danger. And it's usually a gut feeling, and I trusted my gut then. And then the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and then like no one was working for a while. People didn't have jobs because they couldn't go to work if they were working in person. Everything went remote, went virtual. And so although it was nice because like it kind of gave me a moment of clarity and moment like a brief amount of time to kind of reevaluate some of my stuff, my priorities, my career path and moving forward. And did I wanted to stick with teaching? And the goal is, yeah, I still wanted to stick with teaching. And so I kept applying for jobs even while the pandemic was going on. And I wasn't getting anything for months and months and months. And then the next school year was about to start and I still didn't have a teaching job. And so I was like kind of freaking out. I was like, oh, I'm going to be unemployed for a long time. And then in the city that I was living in, I was just like, to hell with it. Let me apply to be a substitute teacher. At least then I can kind of get my foot in through the door and then I can get some, I can have some income coming in because I needed to make money somehow. So I then spent an entire year substitute teaching. And so then I would go to various campuses. I would just be a babysitter in the room, facilitator if they had assignments and picking up stuff, taking attendance and all that, making sure that everything was in tip-top shape and that the students weren't jumping around on desks and being crazy, And I had some really good times. I had some really bad times. I will never do elementary school again. I will never do elementary school substitute teaching ever again. You cannot have me do that again, ever. And it just was not a good experience for me. And so then after a while, I started, like, the second semester started happening and I was applying to jobs and I was trying to get the teaching position as a band director, trying within my area. I didn't really want to move out of my city because I had a lot of family where I was living in the city. And so I didn't want to move out to a different city. I wanted to kind of stay within the area as best as I could, which kind of limited me on my options, unfortunately. And so I would apply, and then I just get nothing. And so I had to make a decision at that point. I had, it was starting to get into June, into July, and I had to make a decision. Do I stick with teaching or do I just, throw those 4.5 years of education in college away and pursue a career in something else that'll probably be more benefit to me? And I remember the school district was hosting a job fair that weekend when I was thinking about these things. And I said, you know what? This will be my last opportunity. If nothing comes out of this job fair, I am just going to quit teaching altogether. So I spruce myself up. I get dressed, professionally, and I make my way to this job fair. Had my resume printed and everything, made it look all nice and neat, This was before AI system filtering happened. So I get to this job fair and I remember meeting the fine arts director. Him and I know each other for a bit. And he was informing me about this one position at the middle school in the area. And the middle school was about 3 minutes from my house. I lived very near it. And the funniest thing is I actually attended that middle school when I was growing up. And I said, oh, okay. And so then I go to the school table and I said, "Hi." I introduced myself. My name is Jason. Uh, I have experience as a fine arts teacher. I went to school for music education, and this is blah blah blah, all this stuff. And then the principal looks at me and goes, "You subbed for our choir room, our choir teacher a lot this past year, didn't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did. I was your main man for the choir substitute teacher." And then they looked at me and they go, "How would you feel being the choir teacher at this school?" And in my head, I go, "Really? Choir of all things?" I was like, "There's no way. I can't even get a band position. You want me to teach choir?" The only thing that I'm good at when it comes to choir is singing with a low voice. That's it. I have no other experience with this. Like I did choir when I was in a fraternity in college, and I did like a voice methods class, but teaching middle school choir, but I needed a job. So I said, "You know what? I'd be interested." And they're like, "Okay, cool. Let's you leave your resume here and we'll contact you as soon as we get back to the school and we'll talk about the process." And I go, "All right." So I left my resume there. I shook hands with the finance director and I said my goodbyes and all that. And I walked out the door and I go, that was a really interesting experience. I drive home and as soon as I get home, I start to like put on my comfy clothes and just kind of relax and for the rest of the day. And then I get a phone call and it's from one of the assistant principals at the school. And they're like, "We would like to offer you the choir position. Would you accept? Do you accept?" And I go, "Yep. Yes. Yes, I accept." And I go, "Okay, cool." And so now I had a job. Now I got hired as a choir director for middle school. And I've never had any choir experience aside from doing choir and fraternity and voice methods. But I was more excited at the fact that I, was finally able to achieve a job and I can at least teach music in a way at a middle school that's 3 minutes away. I was so happy I was going to save gas. I mean, going from a 30-minute commute to a 3-minute commute, I was going to save so much money on gas. And I was so excited. And I had so many plans and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then we got to new teaching. You know what the funniest thing is? Me accepting that job position changed my life forever. It did. It changed my life forever. Because through this experience, I met the love of my life. And I'll tell the story very quickly. Eventually, I'll get her on the podcast and we can talk about how we met and our experiences as teachers, and talk about this over the Bonfire Chat, But I remember going to the new teacher orientation and I sat down. I'm super introverted. So I have my over the head earphones, like headphones. And I remember just like having the music on. I went into this purely for the I am not going to really make friends. I just want to like gain experience and kind of like learn and move forward. Like I'll have the professional colleague relationship, but like best friends, I'm not really looking for because I already had my friend group. I'm good. I don't need it to be too big. I remember sitting down at the table in my school section because it was in a very big convention hall. And I remember sitting down, I was on my phone listening to music, and I'm like introducing myself to the band directors that are going to work at the school because they were brand new as well. And this woman walks in and sits down, and she's a new English teacher. And I remember seeing her for the first time and just being mesmerized by her. And in my head, I'm like, don't even think about it, dude. Don't even think about it. So, and then I was like, she's never going to talk to you. So, like, it's going to be fine. And then she talked to me. And then we've talked every day ever since. We haven't stopped talking to each other every day ever since. And now we're married. We're about to be married for a year now in October. So, it's just what an experience and what a decision that changed my life forever. I met the love of my life through that. So, but I'm telling you the story because I want everyone to understand something about teachers. So there are good parts to being a teacher. You know, you have your professional relationship with your students. Um, you know, being able to see them perform. You know, speaking as a music teacher, you being able to see them perform and do their very best, and seeing their proud look at the end of their performance, showing off. You know, that gives you a sense of pride. You see them grow. I remember when I was teaching middle school choir, I had a student there who was absolutely amazing. And then I switched jobs to being a band director a couple years later. And in my last year teaching as a band director, I had that same student. And, you know, seeing them when they were in sixth grade all the way up to when they're almost a senior, it's quite, it's like watching your own children grow. So, you know, those are the moments that make everything worthwhile. You know, when you get the little notes and little treasures and presents from the students, you know, saying that they really appreciate you and stuff like. I have a whole collection of them, you know, in a folder of all the things that the kids have made for me, and, you know, notes and stuff, appreciations, and all that. Like that, every time I get them, it clenches my heart. It reminds me, like, you know, I say this, if you're a teacher, you would understand. That is my why, you know. But it really motivated me to like want to do better at my job, do better for these kids and stuff like that. But and let's be real, there were also really difficult parts about being a teacher. You know, when you are going and getting your degree as an education major, you're wanting to be a teacher, you don't understand that there's a lot of paperwork. Like your job is 30% teaching, you're in 70% paperwork. You have to deal with all of the logistical aspects, especially if you're planning lots of events and trips and stuff like that. Like you have to do that yourself. You have to do all of the, like, if you're in charge of your own like budget, you have to be in charge of that too. Or if you're in charge of you know, you're the only teacher, you have to grade. You have to grade papers. You have to look at all of them, make sure they're all doing it correctly. And then when you're done grading papers, you have to input those grades into the grade book. You know, back in the day, they used to have physical grade books, but like nowadays, they utilize different LMSs for their grade books. You know, you have to deal with meetings with parents, meetings with administration, professional development meetings. You have to deal with all of that. You know, cohort meetings as well, or you know, core subject meetings as well. Like you have to deal with all of that. Uh, Teachers, your job doesn't begin when school starts. Your job begins 2 weeks before school starts. So if you think you're like, oh, okay, school doesn't start till like the middle of August, so I'll have like all that time to rest. No, your job starts in late July, early August. You have to start planning your room because you may never know if they changed your room or not. You have to start lesson planning. You have to attend all of these professional development meetings. They have to tell you what your why is. I mean, hell, if you're in Texas, you've seen those convocation videos of teachers going to their convocations, and they are like full blown out spectacles. Like it's crazy how much money they're willing to spend on a teacher pep rally, but they don't want to spend that money to give the teachers the supplies that they need. It's absolutely ridiculous. I have a lot of comments to talk about that, but we'll talk about that at a later time. But you also have your testing. Teachers, future teachers, you have to understand that you will administer tests. You will have to administer STAR testing. That is a fact. You can pray to God or pray whatever God you believe in to get you out of administering a test, but odds are, especially if you're a first year teacher, you're going to be administering a test every time they have one. You can try to be buddy buddy with whoever organized the test and see if you can be put on like bathroom duty or hallway monitor. But most of the time, like I said, you're going to be administering a test. So get used to being in a room for a few hours, not being able to do anything but observe the students. And they're not even going to be your students for the most part. They're going to be like completely random students you have never seen before. These next things I'm going to talk about, the realities that are difficult for people to understand about teaching is behavior, workload, and taking the work home. Now, let's talk about behavior first. Parents, if you are listening to this, family members of that, you have a family member that is a parent of some kind, I want you to understand something. Your child is not as perfect as you may think they are. They are not without fault. In the moment that you make them believe that they are not without fault, you have royally screwed a teacher over and made their lives a living hell. Your child needs help. They need help with their own behavioral responsibilities. They need to be able to understand their emotions. They need to be able to understand how to express their emotions. They need to be able to do everything with their emotions, their behavior. That is not the teacher's job. At one point, they're now starting to make it the teacher's job to teach these kids about emotions and social manners, SEL, social emotional lessons. They're starting to do that now because parents are not reliable. Well, I say parents very generally. If this is not applicable to you, then I'm not talking about you. But most parents are not responsible enough to teach their kids how to behave. They're not. They will either resort to being abusive, they will resort to violence, or they will resort to negligence. Like, you ever seen TikToks or videos or anything like that? The parent doesn't want to deal with the kid, so they give them the iPad. They said, all right, here, have the iPad, go to town. And try taking that iPad away from the kid. What are they going to do? They're going to throw a tantrum. And so eventually they get the idea that, like, oh, they go to school, let's have the teachers teach them how to behave. Let them teach them how to be human beings and learn respect and manners and stuff like that. And we can implement that, yeah, but that's not our sole purpose. We're not parents. We're not parenting their kid. We shouldn't be parenting their kid. We're supposed to help them grow, learn the subject matter, and kind of teach them how to be leaders in their own sense. So, and this is, unfortunately for a lot of teachers, this is the main reason why they are leaving, is because of the behavior aspect to it. And just teach your kids to behave. If you're first year teacher, new teacher, you need to have boundaries. Okay. And we're going to talk about workload here. You need to understand what you are capable of handling within the school day and outside of the school day. You need to have a work-life balance. Your school day starts when the first bell, or like 30 minutes before the first bell rings for your first class. And school ends 30 minutes after the last bell rings for school to end. Anything before or after that time is your time to recover. Okay? But, I have all of these papers that I need to grade and stuff like that. Utilize your students for that. Have them grade your papers for you. You have a kid that does really well and doesn't have a lot of work to do. Give them the answer key and say, can you grade these papers for me, make sure they're correct? I guarantee you they would love to do that for you because it gives them a responsibility, it gives them a task, and they feel like they're in leadership. And then you're developing a leader. Who knows? You may have inspired them to be a teacher themselves. Do not take work home with you. Please don't do that. Okay? Unless it's really important that needs to get done and you have no other time to do it, then I guess allow it every once in a while, but not every day. Don't take your work home. Don't. Your home life is for you to rest and recover. Enjoy a nice dinner and a glass of wine to kind of decompress. Watch a movie or continue watching your TV series, or start go on your computer or your game console and start playing video games, or read in a dimly lit room with the candle lit with some nice subtle ambient music playing. Do something that will help you relax. Don't take your work home. And if they try to get you to do work when you're at home, tell them that you are busy. Respect your boundaries. Do it. It's hard to leave as a teacher But you got to do what you got to do for yourself, for your career, for your health. And you know what? If we have more time, I would love to talk more about this, but we're running out of time, unfortunately. If this if you'd like to hear more about, education, teachers and stuff like that, I have a whole lot more to talk about. I barely just covered the beginning parts of it. And if anything, we can bring in my wife and we can talk together to you about, teaching and all that. She actually has more experience as a teacher than I do. She does. She's amazing. But regardless, at the end of the day, I really want you to think about something. I want to speak to all the teachers directly. This school year is whatever you make it out to be. If you really want it to be a really great school year, you will find ways to make it great for you and your students. If you are treating this school year as another year just to get by, you might have a really rough time at the beginning of the school year. You don't have to be perfect at what you do. First year teachers, we are not expecting you. They are not expecting you at all to be perfect. They're not expecting you to be the best teacher ever that they've ever seen. Pure pedagogical prodigy you are. They expect you to make mistakes. They expect you to ask questions. And your goal is to survive the school year. You can achieve success throughout the school year. Don't get me wrong. But your goal is to survive the end of the first year. Because by the end of the first year, you will know what worked and what doesn't work. And so then by the time that if you decide to stick around for that second year, or you move to a different school, but you still will be teaching, you know what will work and what won't work. Survive your first year. It's going to be okay. You have a lot more support than you think. Sometimes making it through the day and being there for your students is enough. That's fine. You don't have to solve all of their problems, but you can at least listen to them. So just do your very best. If you're a parent to a student, please be nice to your teachers. I guarantee you they're anxious out of their heckin' mind. Students, be nice to your teachers. I guarantee you they're not picking on you. They probably saw something at the wrong time for you and they are calling you out. Just do your homework. Don't, and I say this to my kids when I was teaching, I said this not as often, but sometimes in some realism, I would stare at them. I was like, please don't be an asshole to your teachers. Don't do it. Don't be an asshole. They already have to deal with so much as is. Do your work, get to class, get to school. Just get through the day. And then when school's over and you're off campus, then you can do all of the hooligan things that you want to do. Like hooligan to your heart's content. But don't do that to a teacher when they're just trying to get through the day. So just think about that. I would love to talk more about this. I would love to talk more about teaching, education, schools, and all that, because I have a lot to say as a teacher. But I want to leave you with this question. Teachers, what kind of school year do you want this to be for you? And students, how are you going to approach this school year? How are you going to act this school year? And parents, what can you do to help your student and your teachers this school year? Hug a teacher. Buy them coffee. Let them know that they are appreciated and loved, because I guarantee you, teaching is a thankless job. Anyways, I thank you for sitting down with me and enjoying this nice chat over the bonfire. Keep the fire burning, and I'll see you at the next episode.